talk about colonialism and how it has affected African men, I think the first thing I want to say is that although I'm going to address specific aspects of how colonialism has affected African men, that does not mean that we should exclude African women from that conversation. It's very important to see what colonialism has done to us collectively. But the reason I'm looking specifically at men now is that we're having a discussion around the role of African men today, the future of African men, and what African men should do to empower themselves and to play a meaningful role in today's society. I think the first dimension of what colonialism has done to African men is to look at the political aspects. You must remember that colonialism in many ways is to push the African man completely out of his role, what he used to preside over, where he used to have a voice, where he used to have opinions, where his opinions would count. Now, when colonialism leads to effective changes in the economy, in political leadership, in the ownership of land, in the ownership of political ideas, when the African man's voice and contribution is completely void and made to be insignificant, it changes completely the role and the impact that an African man can have, and also how he and the society around him sees him. So the political aspects lead to a situation where the African man does not own, and we must also remember that ownership in the European sense and in the African traditional sense is quite different. In the European sense, for instance, in the case of land, it would mean that you have a title deed, you have a document that says that I, Mr. So-and-so, owns this particular plot and I can use it for whatever I want. Nobody can step on this land. I can fence it. I can protect it. If I want to grow something, I can. If I would just want to sit and look at the sky, I can do that. Now, in the African sense, or the African traditional sense, ownership was collective. So to own something was to own with my people and for my people. When I produce for my people. When I do something, I will be evaluated by my community, whether I'm using this for a purpose that is of need to my community, or if I'm wasting the land. So that's important to remember as well. But now remember that as a capitalist type of understanding ownership became increasingly the dominant way to look at land, the role that I would have as a man become completely unuseful, or it cannot be used anymore. It cannot serve as a template for ownership because it's not regarded, it's not protected, it's not respected. So the political impact on this is that my ability as an African man to look after my people, to come with constructive ideas, to work honorably for my community is greatly challenged. And this is the result that we have seen over the years as well, that many of our African men who have stepped up to leadership are not necessarily there to serve the people's interest, are not necessarily there to be honorable. In a very scary way, they emulate and remind us of, and sometimes even overdo, the templates that we got to be introduced to through our oppressors. And it's hurtful when our men do that, when our protectors and guides take over the same understanding of leadership. And the second dimension I want to focus on is the cultural dimension. In addition to the political and economical changes that colonialism represented, colonialism was also ushered in through mechanisms that on one side looked as if they were, if not lucrative, at least something of deep value. For instance, education. Now, education is something that is difficult to say that we should not have. We don't want it, it should stop. But the type of education that we as African men and women, of course, were forced to undergo was an education that took us away from the continent we were supposed to represent, in terms of knowledge, in terms of representation, in terms of our focus. Over time, our focus through education shifted away from the continent towards the places of real power, meaning Europe, meaning any place actually outside of the continent. And over the years, less and less emphasis and interest would develop on our part for the continent that we were supposed to serve. Why? Because Africa increasingly was associated with weakness, with inabilities, with being insignificant. And who wants to study what is insignificant and unable? We want to study and relate to something that is powerful, that is happening. And increasingly that was definitely not Africa. So through education, our orientation moved away from what should have remained our center. Our land, our culture, our nations, our history, ourselves. We became a people that felt forced to emulate, copy, and be someone else. Aligned with culture, of course, also comes religion, comes spirituality, comes the knowledge that we are supposed to apply on a daily basis. Our worldview changed, our perception of ourselves changed. Our relation to, or the way we even cut off certain relations to, our own spiritual groundings changed, and we're sometimes completely cut off. Now, that's a violation that you really need to apply your mind to understand. What happens when the people over time completely dislocate themselves away from its roots, away from what used to anchor them, away from what used to give them life. So colonialism in that way, from a political point of view, took us away from making decisions for our land, our economy, what we own, what we are here to be custodians of. Secondly, it created a cultural dislocation away from our beliefs, our spirituality. We started to doubt Africa. We started to move around being doubtful Africans, being insignificant Africans, and being this people that have a dual consciousness, where on one level we experience through being just this entity that I'm walking around, meaning my body, but in my mind I'm also seeing myself from outside. And when I see myself from outside, I see myself through the gaze of the people who have oppressed me, who have dislocated me, who have overly defined me. And I see a weak person. I see a man who's not really a man. I see a man who I don't really identify with. And that does something to me spiritually, mentally, culturally, and politically. Lastly, colonialism has also changed the makeup of the African man from a social point of view. And I want to mention patriarchy as a cultural idea and almost like an educational tract that we are forced into. Now, there's difference of opinion about what I'm going to say now. Some say that patriarchy is an idea that exists globally and it's exercised in different ways and in different measure by different people. And so some will also say that patriarchy has existed since the beginning of day in Africa as well. I'm not so sure about that. From what I have studied, I'm not so sure that patriarchy is an idea that has strong African roots. I am sure that there's been many men throughout history who have tried to borrow from what we today know is patriarchy through power struggles, through conflicts, through violence, through different means of trying to acquire some power that didn't actually belong to them and abuse it in the process. But I don't see patriarchy as a grounding idea of the continent. From what I have researched, I see an ancient continent that had a much deeper understanding of equality between the genders and an appreciation for the duality, the difference, the dynamic between the two. The way we have kind of been taught to look at gender is a very imbalanced one. And I think that we have been forced to adopt very strong aspects of patriarchy. So for me, what is important to reflect on when some of us today speak with a voice as African men and say that I'm a real African man, my woman doesn't even dare to speak in my presence, my children are just quiet when I enter the house. Now, is that really the role of a father and a man that we had in our ancient times? From my studies, it doesn't sound right if we say that. When we say that as an African man, people must listen. I am powerful, I command, I tell. I'm not sure if that was the only value that African manhood was drawn from. I think that African manhood was drawn equally from a value where a woman would tell me and instruct me and explain to me, expose me, teach me, raise me. And I would have to listen. I would have to be disciplined. I would have to work in an interactive, balanced relationship with women. And sometimes when there was an imbalance, the imbalance wouldn't even be in my favor. It would be in favor of the woman. Because the woman was seen as somebody who has an even higher consciousness, is not so locked down in personal issues of hurt male ego, which we know we can easily get wrapped up in, and has a greater ability and a predisposition to be able to look at things in a bigger picture, a greater way. Identifying what is good for the nation, not just what is good for me, what is good right now, what is good in a quick way. So I think we need to move away from seeing patriarchy as the only value source to draw from, and slowly bring back an African manhood that also is deeply rooted in an understanding of balance, understanding of our women as powerful counterparts and supporters and team players, not this constant bickering of women as enemies, as opposition, as somebody that we need to intimidate into our power reign. I would firmly say that when we do that, we are just borrowing and implementing the power structure, the values that we were taught by our oppressors. So in this, I'm saying that the social dynamic or the social dimension of colonialism created us to be different men, created us to borrow our values from outside, created a complete dislocation. And I would say, and we must remember, that it's quite a long time since we lived our ancient, free, self-defined ways. We have been invaded and spoken for and decided for a very long time. So our social memory is not enough. None of us living Africans today can remember what it's like to be free. Even we come from a parent generation that cannot remember what it was like to be free. We have to go very far back to remember what Africa was like when we ruled, when we decided, when we developed. So the least we can do is at least to be very analytical and critical about the ways we have become, and not just mask it up and say, well, this is just what African men do. Well, as an African man, that's just how we've always done it. No, we do a lot of things now that we have not always done. We do a lot of things now that people who has an oppressive agenda for us are happy for us to do, because we have created a manhood that destroys many times, that intimidates many times, that comes to life when something else dies. That is not a manhood that can sustain us as African people. Our view and our selfish hopes that women should be weak and they should listen to us all the time, they should never speak back, they should just be at the back, that does not sustain us as an African people. We will not ever be strong if that's the type of womanhood and manhood that we idolize. So I think we are invited to calm down a little bit in our oppressed self and really ask ourselves some grounding questions. What kind of African men do Mama Africa really need right now? What serves her children best? What kind of partners could we ever be the best ones to our women? What do they need from us? What does the future of this continent need from us? Those are the questions that if we don't answer them, answers will come from sources that we're not going to appreciate. So I think we will definitely benefit from us leading that discussion, taking charge of that discussion, and be very accurate in the goals we set for our own future.
This can't be real.